Wow, it really is great to be here. I want to talk today about design and about aesthetics and about beauty and about the nature of these things, and to clear up what I think is a fairly common misconception about what this stuff is all about. And it's relevant. A lot of people are talking more about design these days and paying more attention to it, especially technology companies. And they've seen, after the example of Apple, how becoming a little bit more design-focused can add a lot of value to all of the things that they're doing. Apple, you remember, years ago was just a computer company. They just made machines. But over the years, they've evolved to have a much more design-focused sort of approach. And that's been the foundation of their success, which is a success that, of course, everybody has an interest in trying to replicate, especially technology companies. But it's not as easy as it sounds. It's a lot easier to say than it is to do, for interesting reasons. And it's a little bit ironic because while it's technology companies who have the most to gain by doing this, they're at sort of a special disadvantage in some ways. You know, the things that attract us to technical fields are the very nature of the things that we study, the mathematics, the physics, computer science, all of that stuff. It's all really nice. It's all on a very firm, objective foundation. There's a very clear answer between what's right and what's wrong. There's not a lot of judgment, and there's comfort in that. And so for a company with a very strong engineering culture, a very strong technology culture, it can be hard for them to do a better job integrating design into what they do. Because design is weird. It's not like this other stuff. And designers are weird. And they talk about weird stuff all the time. They talk about form and balance and proportion. And almost most terrifyingly, they talk about beauty. And for someone with techie ears, this is a little bit fishy. It feels soft and woolly and subjective. And so they're very suspicious of it and very mistrustful, which is kind of a shame. Because after all, I mean, you look at the way something appears, you're really just looking at, this veneer on top of it. Talk about the way something looks, it's not fundamental to what it is. If you're making judgments of whether you think it's beautiful or not, well, that's just your opinion, man. This is very subjective. You're not really getting at anything essential. It's just a question of taste. And after all, as we all know, de gustibus non est disputandum, which is Latin. So you know that it's probably true. And all it means is, over matters of taste, there is no argument. It's just what you like. And beauty's like that. I like country music, you like jazz, and it's not a question of one of us being right or wrong. It's just, it's whatever you like. It's also cultural. I was a young student of philosophy in the early 90s when postmodernism was a big deal. And I was taught that, questions of beauty, models of beauty are socially constructed. And it varies from place to place in the world. What we consider to be beautiful is different from what other people consider to be beautiful in other parts of the world. And it changes over time as well. Fashions change, styles change. It's all, like I say, a little squishy, a little woolly. And even in circumstances where there might be a more well-organized and apparently objective set of criteria by which we make aesthetic judgments, for example, of Merlot, you're a very well-trained sommelier, and there's all of the criteria against which these wines will be rated. Even when these judgments, these aesthetic judgments, are even repeatable by different people in different places, the criteria themselves are socially constructed. They were just made up. What makes a great, beautiful Merlot? Well, someone just made that up, probably a couple hundred years ago, and probably some French dudes. And this is sort of where I was at in thinking about design. I'd been leading teams of software developers and hardware developers for a long time. And very often there would be designers around doing their thing, whatever it was, and we just sort of gave them the benefit of the doubt and agreed that they were adding value, but didn't really understand what was going on. And that worked okay until a few years ago when my teams got a little bit bigger, and I found that I actually had designers reporting directly to me, which was a very uncomfortable situation because I was responsible, ultimately for the work these people were doing. And I had no idea what the hell they were doing. And it was hard because I wasn't able to help them do a better job either because I just didn't know what to tell them. I didn't understand any of this stuff. And so I'm the kind of guy when I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, I like to at least be able to fake it convincingly. But I wasn't even at that point, so I knew I was in trouble. So I went around talking to all the designers I could find, reading everything I could find about the nature of design, what designers learn in school, history of design. And along the way, I saw a few very interesting things that changed my mind about what's actually going on in design and what it actually rests on. And I want to share a few of those with you today. We'll start with this fella. Hopefully a couple people in the room recognize this guy. This is Kelly Johnson. He's one of the greatest aeronautical engineers of the 20th century. He worked at Lockheed and very famously led the Skunk Works program at Lockheed after the Second World War. Really very interesting guy, and he designed a lot of really beautiful airplanes. Like this one is the P-38 Lightning, which is the Second World War interceptor. Those twin tails at the back, as a matter of fact, were the inspiration for those Cadillacs in the 50s that had the big fins on their tails. Really neat looking machine. Skunk Works produced this thing. This is the U-2 spy plane. Gary Powers was shot down flying one of these in the Cold War, very infamous. And most interesting to me is this thing. This is a very beautiful SR-71. This one's especially interesting because even though it first flew more than 50 years ago, this airplane still holds all of the records for an aircraft with air-breathing engines for altitude and speed. The only things that ever flew higher or faster than this had rockets on them. And this is interesting. So Kelly wasn't just a great engineer, he was a great engineering manager. Which is something I think is not celebrated enough, or recognized enough, because the great engineering managers are few. And he was able to organize these very high-performing teams, and when he was bringing new engineers on, part of his, I guess, indoctrination, for want of a better word, was this idea. He said, an aircraft that looks beautiful will fly the same way. Think about that for a second. Why should that be true? This bothered me for a long time because it stuck in my throat like a bone. I couldn't get over it because it was undeniable. I mean, you look at these airplanes and they're gorgeous. SR-71 is beautiful. What possible connection could there be between the way a thing looks, on the one hand, which is just, this woolly aesthetic judgment, and the way that it performs, a hardcore, super-flying airplane. And I realized after a while that there was nothing for it. I just had to swallow hard and get over it. But it meant that I had to jettison the original idea, which was that, beauty's just what you like, it's just subjective. And I had to try to accept the possibility that when we're making these aesthetic judgments in design, that there's actually something going on. There's actually an objective ground. This was an interesting idea. And it reminded me of things that I had experienced in the past, learning a lot about mathematics and physics and stuff. Mathematicians take this for granted. G.H. Hardy, mathematician's apology, said this: beauty is the first test. There's no permanent place in this world for ugly mathematics. This is an interesting idea. If something's ugly, it can't be the best solution. We know this as engineers, as technical people. Somehow we forget it when we're talking about other things. There was a very interesting study done just last year in the UK, published in a journal, Neuroscience. And what they did is they gathered a whole bunch of graduate and postgraduate students in mathematics. And they had them rate a whole bunch of equations as being either beautiful or ugly or neutral in the middle. And then they took these students and they put them in an MRI machine, and they showed them these equations and monitored their brain activity. And the result was that when they were looking at the ones that they rated as being beautiful, the same area in their brains lit up as lights up in the brains of people who were looking at great works of art. The aesthetic experience, in other words, was exactly the same. This is fascinating. And by the way, this was the one that they all agreed was the most beautiful. This is Euler's identity. This one's very spooky once you get into it. So I've been geeking out on design. I've been reading everything I could find, and when you start geeking out on design, it doesn't take very long before you come across another area where the beauty of a thing and its performance are very tightly coupled, and that's typography. And you don't spend very long reading about typography before you come across the works of the great Massimo Vignelli, who did this. He was a designer who had a very strong belief that the beauty of a design was an excellent guide to how well it would perform. So he designed all of the signs and maps and things for the New York subway and a whole bunch of other stuff that you would definitely recognize if I had enough time. And what's interesting about it is when you're designing something like this, signs at an airport or public transportation or something like that, there's enormous pressure on the designer for it to be functional. Millions of people are going to be looking at this hundreds of times a day for years, and it's got to work. And Massimo believed, one of his operating principles was that if you started with something that was beautiful, it was the best possible guide you could have to how well it would eventually work. One other is this calendar, which is very famous, and I put up here just because I think it's gorgeous, and I want to remind myself to get this for 2016. Set in Helvetica, of course. So what does all this mean? What it means is we can get over our initial and very understandable sort of techie mistrust of aesthetics and of beauty as a guide to how we should make better things. We can actually say something like this, that beauty is instrumentally reliable. Something that is instrumentally reliable gets you where you want to go. Physics, chemistry, mathematics, the models of the world that these things give us are instrumentally reliable. They let us build airplanes and computers and stuff like that. My idea, well, it was originally just a suspicion, but I think now it's actually a belief, is that beauty is in the same class as those things, that we can actually trust us to get us where we need to go. Beautiful things really do work better. So, what's the upshot of all of this? And what are we supposed to do about this? Well, if this idea about the nature of beauty is true, and I think it mostly is, well, then it should inform the way we practice design, the way we approach it as a discipline. It should approach the way that we manage designers and design teams. And maybe most importantly, it should help us understand how we can integrate design into our organization and into our corporate process. And it gives us a leg to stand on. Instead of it being woolly, squishy, weird stuff, there's actually something real and fundamental going on. And it'll get us over that initial weird mistrust of it and give us some more confidence. So I wanted to close with the last two lines of this poem by Keats. Beauty is truth. Truth, beauty. That is all you know on earth and all you need to know. Thank you very much.